Okay, so today we're going to continue talking about ratios and proportions, but we're going to connect that to percents. You may have seen this proportion last year where you had a is over of equals percent out of 100. If not, think about this is over of as the part over the whole. And when we have a part out of a whole, we can try and figure out what percent that is by setting this ratio equal to the percent out of 100. And that's because percent means out of 100. Okay, so let's put an example to this. Suppose you got 14 points out of a possible 20 points on a quiz. What percent did you get correct? So when you get a quiz back or a test and you get a grade, that is based out of 100%. You're getting a grade based on what percent of the test or quiz you got correct. So we're going to look at what's important here. What information did they give us? We know that we got 14 points out of 20 points. So in case you're not realizing this, the whole, what was the most number of points you could get? That was 20. That's our whole. That's our of. Then how many out of 20 did you get? You got 14, so that's 14 out of 20. And if we want to know what percent that is, we can set that equal to x out of 100. Now remember, in the last slide, I showed you that this top number out of 100 is the percent, and that's what we're trying to find, what percent this equals. So we're going to do we're going to solve this proportion. I think I'm going to use what I know about multiples, and I know 20 times 5 is 100, so then I'm going to multiply 14 times 5 to get x. So x is going to equal 14 times 5, and that is 70. And don't forget, this is representing a percent, so you need to put a percent there. So if you got 14 points out of 20, you would have gotten a 70% on this quiz. Okay, now sometimes the questions are worded different, and I'm going to word them sometimes like this. So for example, this question says, so let's put this as example 2. 30 is what percent of 50? So I'm going to use this proportion is over of equals percent out of 100 to help me solve this question. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to set it up just like I would in my previous proportions. I know it's asking me for a percent, so what percent? So I know that my percent, which would go here, so this is my percent, that's what I don't know, so you know that I'm going to use that as my variable, so that's x. And I know that since I'm finding a percent, my denominator is automatically 100 because percent means out of 100. Now, it's tough when they're worded like this to figure out what the whole is and what the part is. So I'm going to try and figure out what the whole is here, okay? So what is the total? And if I look back here with my words, it's easy to see that of means my whole, and it says of 50. So 50 is my of. So I'm going to go here and put 50 as my of. Now I also see that my part, which can also be said as is right here. It says 30 is. Okay, so normally the number will come before the word is. Not always, but most of the time it will. So I'm going to put my 30 as my part. Now I have a proportion here that I can solve. And that should be fairly easy. I don't need to do cross products because I know 50 times 2 is 100. So 30 times 2 should give me x. So that means x equals 30 times 2. So that's 60. And the question was percent. So this is 60%. Okay. So if you had 30 out of 50, that would be 60%. Okay, now let's look at this problem. We're going to call this example 3. Okay, and make sure that you're writing the problem that says what percent of 20 is 4. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and try to figure out what goes where. Okay, what percent? So obviously they're asking for what, which I don't know. So the percent is going to be my unknown. So let me set this up. They're asking for a percent, so I know it's going to be out of 100, and I don't know what percent, so that's X. Now I have, let's see, let me look at my part here, or my whole. So I'm looking at the rest of the words, and it says of 20, and then is 4. So I'm going to try and figure out where those go. So I see of is my denominator, which is my whole. So I can tell that of 20 is my denominator. So I'm going to put 20 as my denominator. And then you can also clearly see that is 4. So is my part. So 4 is my is, or my part. So this is basically saying you have 4 out of 20. What percent is that? Again, I don't need to do cross products on this because I'm using fairly easy numbers, but I could use cross products. Okay, so let's say that I just wanted to do 20 times 5 is 100, so I would do 4 times 5 to get x. So x equals 4 times 5, so x equals 20%. Okay. Okay, so we're going to call this next one example 4. Make sure that you write the example. 15 is 60% of what number? So let's go through the steps one more time. We have, let's look for what we know, what we don't know. I like to start with what we don't know. So I look for the part of the sentence that has the question. So I see of what number? Okay, so that's a little bit tricky, but the of is what we're looking for. So let's go ahead and set this up ahead of time. And I know that my proportion is going to be a percent because it gave me 60%. So 100 is my denominator, and it's 60%, so 60 out of 100 represents 60%. Then I have my of what number? So I don't know my of, so that's my x. And now it says 15 is. So my is, which goes here, okay, is my numerator. So basically, we know that 60% of something is going to be 15. We just don't know what that something is. So if I said that I was going to give you 60% of all my money, and I ended up giving you $15, you could then figure out how much money I had to start with. What was my whole amount of money? That would be my X. I told you I was going to give you 60%, and you ended up with $15, which is the part of the whole. We could figure this out. So we are going to practice this time, instead of just multiplying, let's practice the cross product. So we are going to do cross product. So 60 times x is 60x, and that should equal 15 times 100. So I have 60x equals 1,500. I'm going to divide by 60. Now, I'm basically just thinking about the flow chart in my head. I know that the flow chart, I'll draw it over here, would be x times 60 would be 60x. And then I know 60x equals 1,500. So when I work backwards, I know I'm going to divide by 60. It's a one-step equation, so it's fairly easy to know automatically what you're going to do when you work backwards. So that's why I showed you right there that I'm going to divide by 60. When we show it like this, though, we show that we're dividing both sides by 60 when we don't use a flowchart. So when I divide by 60, I'm going to use my flowchart first, I ended up getting 25. So when I show it this other way, this canceled out, and I'm left with x equals 25. Now let me just go back and make sure I know what that means. So 15 is 60% of 25. So that means I had $25 to start. If I give you 60%, you end up with $15. So we're going to extend this information later on in the next video about different ways we use percents, specifically when we have to figure out sales tax, or when we figure out a tip, or when we figure out how much something is when it's on sale, because usually sales would be a percentage off. So we're going to look at all those things using these skills. Adios.